By now, I've done a number of videos redrawing characters from the TV series in the Railway series style. I began with the characters from Season 6 and mostly worked upwards, but as a result, I neglected to include the characters introduced in Season 5. Until today. We're going back to the late 1990s as I get out my drawing tablet and begin drawing some classic characters. Whilst Derek wasn't the first TV series original character in Thomas and Friends, or even the first engine created for the TV series, he was the first engine not to be a repaint of a pre-existing Thomas character, provided you don't count Ernest. Derek only appears in one episode, save for a non-speaking cameo in Calling All Engines, and interestingly he is never named in the show. The reason for this is because he was originally going to be called Paxman, after the Paxman brand of diesel engines, of which the engine design used in Derek's basis is. However, the Paxman brand was still around during the time of Season 5's development and release, and so the production crew worried that an engine that constantly overheated would offend the manufacturers of Paxman engines. So they deleted any reference to his name in the script, and when his merchandise saw a release, he was given the name Derek. There's nothing about Derek that really conflicts with the Railway series continuity at all, aside from not being able to access the China clay pits. Other than that, he slots in pretty neatly. Similar to Boko's class, Derek's class was a faulty design that didn't get a lot of love or care from British Railways. And whilst this isn't my own idea, I think it's fair to assume that the Fat Controller probably purchased Derek with the intention of fixing the problems inherent to his class of engine, much like he did with Boko. Derek has teething troubles when he first arrives on Sodor, and the game of telephone distorts this information to the point that, when Bill and Ben hear of the new diesel engine, they are told that he has toothache, which doesn't fill them with confidence. In my retelling of the story, Derek is trialled on Edward's branch line. He is very friendly and polite to Bill and Ben, who have brought him a train of China clay. However, he doesn't get far before overheating. With no other engines available, Bill and Ben have to take the train to Wellsworth by themselves. When they return to the docks, Derek is nowhere to be seen. A dock worker tells Bill and Ben that he was taken away, sending the twins into a panic. Sure, he couldn't pull the train, but he seemed very friendly, and they're worried that Derek has been demoted or withdrawn. It isn't long before they learn that Derek has just been sent to the works for an overhaul and should be back soon. Derek soon returned a much healthier engine. He still sometimes gets ill from time to time, but all engines do. Whereas Boko is wise to Bill and Ben's pranks, Derek is a little bit more gullible, which often makes him an easy target for the twins. However, with Boko as a mentor, Derek is never in too much danger and is still good friends with Bill and Ben despite their teasing. With that said and done, here is the finished illustration. Arry and Bert are characters that I'm a bit mixed on. I like their appearance in Stepney Gets Lost, where they are mysterious, shadowy characters who live at the Sodor Ironworks and take away any steam engines they happen upon in an attempt to get them scrapped. They were very effective in their first appearance, and I feel like a lot of their later appearances missed the point of what made them so special. They stopped being mysterious, you could just find them anywhere on the island in broad daylight. They stopped being obsessed with scrap as well, and just became generic mischief makers. I was also mixed on the merchandise, particularly the electric model ranges, which would typically announce and release one engine or set of twins at a time, rather than in waves. In my opinion, it was always a bit disappointing if the only releases of the year for a certain Thomas model range were Arry and Bert. For starters, you kinda need to buy both of them for it to be worthwhile, and electric models aren't cheap at the best of times. But also they themselves are repaints of a pre-existing Thomas character, i.e. Diesel. The Lionel Arry and Bert were basically the death knell for the range. The Hornby Arry and Bert don't even have the right faces, and whilst Bachmann's attempts do give Arry and Bert their correct faces, the face design they use is just awful in my opinion. Arry and Bert had really interesting and expressive faces, so if the faces are bland and expressionless, then that's most of the appeal gone down the toilet. Some people have worked Arry and Bert into the Railway Series timeline by making them shunters at the Sodor Aluminium Works. I didn't want to do this partially because this has been done before, and partially because I'm not sure if it really works for their characters. Steam engines are primarily made of iron, and Arry and Bert's whole thing is that they want to scrap steam engines, and so it makes sense for them to be involved in the iron business. Saved from Scrap mentions that Edward takes scrap metal from Croc's scrapyard to the steelworks, although no map of Sodor shows the steelworks. I speculated in an earlier video that this could be on the mainland, but thinking about it again, it seems more likely that if the scrap train went to the mainland, then it would have fallen into the responsibility of either James or Henry to take the train. It makes more sense to me if the steelworks were in southwestern or central Sodor, whether this be on the main line, Edward's branch, or even the Peel-Godred line. A steelworks and an ironworks are quite similar. Both involve the melting down and repurposing of iron, whether this be from iron ore or scrap metal. Arry and Bert, or the Grim Messengers of Doom as they are sometimes nicknamed, love the idea of scrapping and melting down steam engines, but given that they work on an island that never stopped using steam locomotives, actual instances of steam engine scrappings are few and far between. Whenever a steam engine arrives at the steelworks, the Iron Twins do whatever they can to keep them around and lure them into traps. To this day it is believed that they have never succeeded, but they have come close a few times, encouraging them to keep on trying. Edward is a wise old engine, however, and so the Diesel's manipulation tactics have no effect on him. And so, here is the finished image. I can kill two birds with one stone here by having these engines be part of the Arlesdale Tramway's locomotive fleet. The Arlesdale Tramway was the precursor to the Mid-Sodor Railway and served the mines at Casnahowen and the harbour at Arlesborough. The tramway was originally horse-drawn, but around 1866 the railway began using locomotives. Bertram was built by George England and Company in 1866. Originally he was the same boxy shape as the other small Englands when they were first built, but later gained the cast iron weight above his tanks that gave him the appearance of a saddle tank engine. Bertram was named after a figure in an old Arlesdale folk tale, a brave warrior who used his combat skills and courage to protect his people from invaders. Bertram was determined to live up to his name, and would pull his trains even if he was feeling under the weather. If another engine was unwell, then Bertram would happily do the work of two engines. If the tramway was faced with times of hardship, Bertram would be undeterred and keep doing what he was best at. Given his status as a tramway engine, I've given Bertram a cowcatcher and side plates, literally making him Bert-Tram. Smudger, meanwhile, was not quite as graceful or heroic as his stablemate. In the TV series, Smudger is based on a Fletcher Jennings Class BB like Rheneas, but I'm not sure if this fits. Smudger was a rough rider and prone to derailments, but the BBs were famously very smooth runners. Therefore, I'll be changing Smudger's basis to an earlier Fletcher Jennings design, still with the well tank but with a shorter wheelbase, more in line with the coupled wheelbase of the Fletcher Jennings Class C, i.e. Skarloey. Smudger wanted to be brave and heroic like Bertram, but failed to realise that there's more to bravery than diving headfirst into danger. Bertram, the tramway staff and the miners all told him what he was doing was wrong, but this just went in one porthole and out the other. Smudger never learned sense, even after having to be rescued by Bertram on more than one occasion. When the Mid-Sodor Railway opened in 1880, Bertram and Smudger were kept around, becoming numbers 3 and 4 respectively. Bertram had proven so reliable that 2 more engines of his type were ordered prior to the MSR's opening, one of which was named Duke. By this point, George England and Company was no more, and so the engines were ordered from the Festiniog Railway's Boston Lodge Works. Bertram and Smudger mostly stuck to the former Arlesdale tramway route, although Bertram helped to mentor the 2 newbies during the MSR's early years. Now, Smudger was regularly getting an earful not just from Bertram, but occasionally from Duke as well. By this point, Smudger had become bitter and firmly stuck in his ways. Eventually, the other engines became disillusioned and allowed Smudger to keep digging his own grave. But the manager eventually put his foot down. If Smudger wasn't going to pull his weight, then he'd make him useful. Smudger was converted into a pumping engine at Casnahowen Mines. Now, of course, this wouldn't be the only time such a fate would befall the Mid-Sodor engine, since the same thing happened to Stanley. The other engines told Stanley about the story of Smudger time and time again, but Stanley didn't take it seriously, and assumed the others were just trying to scare him. But the manager had done it to one engine, and he had no qualms with doing it to another. History was doomed to repeat itself. Bertram continued to work the mineral line until the early 1900s, by which point he was showing his age, and a larger tram engine called Tim was brought in to take over Bertram's workload. Bertram was unceremoniously sold off. In the TV series, Bertram appears in Toby's discovery. Toby and the Fat Controller discover an old abandoned mining complex and plan on reopening it for visitors. Toby hears of the legend of the old warrior ghost, but later discovers that the ghost in question is just a narrow gauge engine that has been restored to run the mining railway. The story seemingly takes place on Toby's tramway, which takes the place of the Arlesdale Miniature Railway on maps of Sodor. Therefore, Bertram's line could literally be the TV series equivalent of the Arlesdale tramway. However, in the railway series, Toby doesn't work on that part of Sodor, not to mention there are no standard gauge lines that go to Arlesdale or Casnahowen, so Toby would have to meet Bertram elsewhere. Perhaps Bertram was sold to the Ulfstead Mining Company, who put Bertram to work at the lead mines in Torryrec. We don't see any narrow gauge lines here, but it's possible that they had a small narrow gauge system to transport materials and workers in and out of the underground tunnels. The lead mines were closed around 1930, before Toby's arrival on Sodor, but it's possible that when the mine was reopened following the discovery of uranium at the complex, Toby was brought in to deliver some materials and witnessed the uncovering of Bertram after many decades of abandonment. With all that said, here is the final illustration. And there you have it. The characters introduced in Season 5, and one from Season 4, reimagined in the style of the Railway series books. Season 5 was a bit more grounded than some of the seasons that followed, so the characters introduced in this season weren't too difficult to reimagine. But it was enjoyable to do regardless, and maybe a bit nostalgic as well. I hope you've enjoyed watching, and I'll see you next time.